What is a frozen job market? There was an article in The Atlantic recently that asserted that the labor market in the US was frozen. So unemployment relatively low, but people aren't necessarily hiring these days. We're going to talk about that in a Canadian context. Our guest is Todd Hirsch. He is an economist and author, and he joins us from Edmonton today. Hello there, Todd.
Hi, Bruce.
So, this phrase, a frozen job market, what does it
Yeah.
mean?
Well, it's actually a new term to me. I hadn't heard of it until I read that piece in the magazine. But it really just refers to this state of inactivity in the job market. No one's hiring. It's hard to find work, even though you're at sort of full employment, like the United States is right now. The way I liken it to is, I always think in metaphor. If you think about, remember when we were children, we would play musical chairs.
Yes.
And round you go, and the music stops, and everyone runs for a chair, and everything's frozen momentarily until you find out, who doesn't have a chair. And it's that state of apprehension when everyone's in a chair, but no one wants to move. The music hasn't started playing again, so it's kind of frozen. No one's hiring and no one's looking.
Well, where it resonated for me in terms of the anecdotes of the people in my life who are in job search is like what's happening. The unemployment rate is relatively low, but people can't seem to find jobs. So talk a
Yeah.
bit about the impact on the economy in practical terms and also people's mindset. Like
Yeah.
some of them think they're going nuts because the unemployment rate's still low and they can't find anything.
And it's a terrible spot to be in for anyone if the unemployment rate is high or low. If you can't find work and you're not getting the interviews, most listeners probably have been in that situation. I know I've been in that situation in the past. Extremely frustrating. But I think what is happening now, and none of the listeners to this program need to be reminded, we are in very unusual days in 2025 here in Canada, but also in the United States. There is an enormous sense of uncertainty. No one knows what's going to happen next in the business community. So even if their unemployment rate is low, you can imagine a lot of businesses are watching, issues from the White House on a daily basis, and all the tariffs and on again, off again, everything that we've all been going through. But
Mm.
businesses in the United States are also living this reality, and I think they are all like, we don't know what to do. Right now, we've got good orders coming in, but we don't know if we want to be hiring on a pile of people if these tariffs are going to come in and destroy everything. And there are more than a few economists that are predicting the US is headed for some sort of recession or at least pronounced a downturn later this year. So it's that sense of apprehension. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know the rules of the game. And as a result, we're not adding to our payrolls
Mm.
right now.
One economic term that I recall from back in the day was the idea of labor mobility. Like you wanted a very efficient labor market in terms of supply and demand that people could pick up and move across the country because there was a job there and it was easy to get hired, relatively easy to fire. Like you wanted that kind of grease in the machine. It would seem like this idea is counter to that foundational economic principle.
Yeah, that's right. And labor mobility is always a little bit higher in the United States than it is in Canada. People will pick up and move across the country or across the regions a little bit more readily in the US than here. But I guess to your point, the idea of labor mobility right now, no one wants to even quit a job they don't like because it's frozen. It's like that game of musical chairs. They might not love the job they're in, but these aren't how the economy was, 3 years ago. Everyone remembers when we were coming out of COVID. People were quitting left, right, and center because they knew they could find another job really
Mm,
quickly. That is not the case now.
mm,
So even if you're not in love with your job, you might be, sticking around, staying put in that job because your
mm.
prospects elsewhere might be quite poor.
So if this isn't grounded in a traditional economic principle and it's not super clear whether it's happening here in Canada, what would be the things that policymakers could think about to give it a bit of a thaw?
Well, certainty would be the very best thing, and I think that might be a bit of a tall order, especially in the U.S. coming from the White House. Certainty in policy, and I've even had businesses here in Canada tell me, we're not in love with the idea of these tariffs, but just give me what the rule is going to be. If I have some certainty, I can at least kind of organize and plan around that. What I can't do is plan when the rules of the game are constantly changing. So, what would be ideal from a policy perspective is certainty. Most economists would not say tariffs are the right way to go. But if you're going to do tariffs, just do tariffs and quit changing the rules every 15 minutes.
We talk a lot about sentiment, consumer sentiment, investor sentiment, because it really does inform the behavior when it comes to the stock market, whether people are willing to buy stocks, whether people are willing to buy homes or cars. How does that question, which is measured, there are quantitative measures
Yeah.
in that, how does that layer into this broad idea?
Well, I guess when you think about the labor market, if you love your job or if you don't love your job, or if you are looking for a job, but you're not able to find one, that is going to decrease your sentiment. You are probably not going to feel very confident as a consumer making those big purchase items, things like a home or a car. And when those things start to fall, that's when the economy can really seize up quickly. It's the big ticket items that you need more consumer confidence for. So, I mean, yeah, right now in the US, unemployment rate is pretty low. It's higher here in Canada. But I think on both sides of the border, there again, all of this uncertainty is weighing down consumer sentiment. No one knows if they're going to have a job, or if you can't find a job, where's income going to come from?
Mm.
All of that is weighing down consumer sentiment, leading to some pretty gloomy consumers walking around or not walking around
Yeah.
auto showrooms.
Right. When we think about the job search, one of the things that is difficult for people who have been recently become unemployed is anchoring to what they had in the past, a
Mm,
salary, a role, perks, benefits, all those sorts of things. And
yeah.
that in itself can create some stickiness to people getting out there in the market, applying for jobs, accepting jobs. What wisdom do you have for this time that we are in and may well be in if the economy continues to deteriorate in terms of unlatching from some of those biases or expectations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And most of us have had to do this. I've been laid off twice in my career in the past, never pleasant. And each time, you obviously you want to look for a job that's comparable in pay or preferably one up. But you may, depending on the circumstances, you may have to kind of swallow your pride and say, all right, what is the best option available to me? Does that maybe pay a little bit less? Can I set aside some of my ego? Can I maybe negotiate perhaps more flexibility or more holiday time or something else to compensate so that the drop in pay does not become the strict focus
Mm,
of what you're doing? No one likes the idea of just settling.
yeah.
But in difficult economic times, most people at some point have had to take a job that pays a little bit less. I think
Mm.
setting aside some ego is often warranted.
Our unemployment rate is a national read of the labor market, and it's a bit wonky because the labor market's so regional. And when I lived in
Yeah.
Alberta, there was many Newfoundlanders who hopped on planes to come work out in the oil fields. As you think about this from an economic perspective, what are the bright spots for if people were to take off an assumption, take away the assumption of where they live, what should they be aware of in terms of regional dynamics or sector dynamics that might invite more opportunity?
More opportunity to for labor mobility to move
Yeah,
around
for
the
them to
country.
find a job, for them to
Yeah.
where are the hot spots, where are the hot sectors?
That's a really great question. There's not a lot of real hot spots in the Canadian economy right now. Again, 2025, with all of this uncertainty, I might have said Ontario, but it's getting hammered right now with the already existing tariffs on autos and steel and aluminum. other parts of the country seeing that as well. Alberta, we actually traditionally we have a pretty low unemployment rate, but it's actually higher than the national average at the moment.
Hmm.
Not because our economy is doing so poor, it's we've had a huge influx of people moving to Alberta because it's more affordable here to live. That has had the effect of pushing the unemployment rate up. So I don't want to sound too dismal about this, but there's really not a whole lot of fantastic job markets in Canada right now. I would say a lot of them are pretty even. What if I were looking to relocate or move? What I would look for is, in addition to job availability, I'd also look for the cost of living in those regions, because that is really going to matter if you're going to be able to find home or rental accommodation without having to pay an enormous amount. And this is why we've seen uh, some of the outflow from the big markets like Toronto and Vancouver, simply because it's not as affordable as other places in the country.
No one could ever call you dismal, even though you're a dismal scientist, for those people who get that reference. Todd, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Bruce. This is a lot of fun.
Todd Hirsch, economist, author, speaker. He was here to join us, or he was here to talk about this idea of the frozen job market.